Have you ever felt as though someone was quietly pulling the strings of your emotions, and you couldn't quite understand why? Sometimes, just a gentle remark or a look that seems caring can leave you confused, insecure, even guilty for simply defending your own feelings. If you've ever experienced that, you might have encountered psychological manipulation, a subtle art of disguise, where truth is distorted and your mind slowly becomes an instrument in someone else's hands without you even realizing it. The truth is, no one is immune to moments when words or emotions steer us in unseen ways. It might come from a parent softly asking, "Why are you so sensitive?" or a coworker saying, "You don't trust me." Phrases that seem harmless on the surface. Yet behind them lies an intricate psychological mechanism. Such questions don't just make you doubt yourself, they quietly erode your inner sense of safety, the very foundation that allows you to know who you are. Psychological manipulation doesn't only occur in toxic relationships. It can hide in everyday interactions between people who care for each other, between colleagues, even within the way parents speak to their children. That's why learning to recognize these tactics isn't merely self-defense. It's an act of awakening. It's a journey back to self-awareness, where you reclaim authority over your emotions, your clarity, and your self-respect. This video is created to help you see more clearly through those linguistic traps, the seemingly harmless questions that can subtly shape your emotions and behavior. When you understand how such questions work, you no longer react out of instinct. Instead, you begin to respond with awareness, guided by a deeper understanding of yourself. Think of this video as a map leading you toward inner freedom, a place where you are no longer swept into the invisible games of others, but begin to live from the center of your own consciousness. As Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Question 1. Why are you so sensitive? In everyday conversations, we sometimes encounter questions that sound gentle, yet carry a deeper intent. Why are you so sensitive? On the surface, it appears to be an innocent curiosity. But if you look beneath the psychological layers, it's actually a subtle tool for emotional invalidation, designed to make you doubt your feelings and gradually lose trust in your inner perception. When someone asks you this question, they're not merely commenting on your emotions. They're sending an unspoken message. Your feelings are the problem. And once you internalize that message, you begin to censor yourself, apologizing for how you feel, suppressing your emotional truth, and slowly silencing the inner voice that Jung called the compass of the soul. Psychological manipulators understand this very well. They know that sensitive people are often perceptive, attuned to subtleties, to shifts in tone and energy, to the quiet disharmonies in relationships that others might overlook. To a manipulator, that sensitivity becomes a threat, a strength they must weaken. Instead of confronting the real issue, they divert the conversation, making you feel as though you've overreacted. At work, for instance, you might raise concerns about a project that's falling behind schedule. You point out concrete risks, yet a colleague smiles and says, "Why are you being so sensitive?" In that instant, the focus shifts from the objective problem to your supposed emotional fragility. The rational observer becomes the overly emotional one. And after hearing this a few times, you begin to stay silent, choosing peace over truth. That's when manipulation succeeds, when you start controlling yourself on their behalf. A mother feels hurt because her child forgets an important occasion. When she expresses her feelings, the child replies, "Mom, you're being sensitive again." That casual remark cuts deeper than any criticism, because it makes her question the validity of her love and expectations. When feelings are dismissed, love itself is suffocated. Such questions slowly erode emotional confidence. You begin to wonder, am I overreacting? Maybe I'm too emotional. And little by little, your genuine feelings are suppressed, while the manipulator comfortably defines truth in your place. Carl Jung once said, "What you deny controls you." When you keep rejecting your emotions just to be accepted, those disowned feelings will eventually govern your behavior through anxiety, depression, or self-doubt. That's why recognizing this psychological game is the first step toward freedom. So how can you escape this trap? First, do not react with guilt. They want you to feel wrong for feeling. Don't give them that power. Pause. Breathe deeply. Remind yourself, my emotions are valid. You can respond calmly yet firmly. I'm not being sensitive. I'm simply aware of what's happening. Or, I feel this way because this matters to me. These responses aren't meant to argue, they affirm your right to feel, one of the most fundamental human rights. When you stand grounded in your emotions, the manipulator loses their leverage. When a coworker asks, "Why are you so sensitive?" you might say, "I'm not sensitive. I just want to make sure every detail is right." When a family member says, "Why do you always care about the small things?" you could answer, "Because those small things show that we care." The calmer your tone, the stronger your stance. Ultimately, the most important thing is to learn to trust your own emotions. Feelings aren't flaws, they're signals. They tell you what's right, what's wrong, and what needs healing. When you dare to listen and honor them, you're engaging in what Jung called a dialogue with the unconscious, the beginning of true inner awakening. Sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a gift, the ability to feel life and others deeply. When you stand by your emotions, you become far less vulnerable to manipulation. For when a person truly understands their inner world, no one can make them doubt themselves. And that is real power, the power of one who has awakened psychologically. Question 2. Do you trust me? On the surface, the question, "Do you trust me?" sounds harmless, a fragile affirmation of connection. Yet, in reality, it can be a subtle form of psychological manipulation, carefully crafted to create emotional pressure, forcing you to prove your trust, rather than requiring them to prove their trustworthiness. When someone demands your trust without transparency or consistent action to support it, they're not seeking genuine trust, they're demanding emotional submission. They want you to believe because they said so, not because they've earned it. And the very moment you agree to trust unconditionally, you hand over your emotional and perceptual authority to someone else. A skilled manipulator understands this mechanism perfectly. They know that trust is one of the deepest human needs. Everyone longs to be trusted, and everyone fears being seen as suspicious or cynical. That's why they use this question as an emotional snare, one that makes you feel guilty for hesitating, and when you do hesitate, they turn the mirror on you. Am I being too doubtful? Am I being unfair? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you fail to recognize the manipulation hidden behind, trust me, you unconsciously allow someone else to define what is true or false, right or wrong, a role that rightfully belongs to your own awareness and inner experience. Imagine this. Your boss asks you to hand over full control of a project, but provides no clear plan or details. When you ask questions, they simply reply, "Don't you trust me?" That question isn't meant to clarify, it's meant to silence legitimate doubt. You're placed in a trap. If you don't trust them, you appear defiant. If you do, you take all the risk. Either way, you lose autonomy. In relationships, the question carries even more weight. A partner asks for your trust while concealing something, avoiding direct answers, or sidestepping transparency. When you probe, they respond with the same formula, "You don't trust me?" As if the problem lies in your lack of trust, not their lack of honesty. That question flips the emotional balance, the manipulator becomes the victim, and you become the one at fault. Gradually, you begin to question your own intuition. Am I being paranoid? Maybe I just don't know how to trust. And slowly, you lose touch with the inner signals Jung called the intuitive function of the soul. But trust is not an unconditional gift. Trust is the result of consistent, transparent behavior cultivated over time, not coerced through guilt. When someone is truly trustworthy, they never need to ask, "Do you trust me?" because their actions already speak the answer. Manipulators, on the other hand, use that question to reverse responsibility. Instead of proving their integrity, they force you to prove your loyalty. Instead of explaining themselves, they make you feel guilty for doubting. And once you accept this dynamic, you start normalizing ambiguity, mistaking confusion for closeness. So, how do you stay out of this trap? First, Don't let guilt dictate your response. Guilt is the manipulator's sharpest weapon. Stay calm and bring the focus back where it belongs. Trust is a two-way street. You can respond with, "I want to trust you, but I need to see clarity in your actions." Or, "Trust isn't built from words, it's something we create together through consistency." These replies are calm yet firm. They affirm your emotional boundaries, showing that you're willing to trust but not blindly. In the workplace, if a boss or colleague asks, "Do you trust me?" you might say, "I trust in results that come from a clear plan. If you can share more details, I'll feel more confident." That's not resistance, it's conscious responsibility. In love, if someone uses this question to avoid openness, you can respond, "I want to trust you, but trust grows through honesty and sharing. If you can be more open, I'll feel safer." Such words not only protect your emotions, but also encourage the relationship to mature. Ultimately, the most important thing is to trust yourself first. When you trust your own intuition and perception, you're far less likely to be swayed by someone else's words. Jung once said, "The person who becomes conscious is no longer driven by another's unconscious." Trust doesn't begin with believing in others. It begins with believing that your feelings and reasoning are valid. Remember, genuine trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And those who are truly worthy of your trust will never need to ask, "Do you trust me?" Because they will make you feel safe without ever having to say a word. Question 3. Are you accusing me of something? That is not a neutral question. It's often a deflection, a reversal tactic. Instead of the person at fault explaining their behavior, you are suddenly forced to defend yourself. At its core, this is projection. The manipulator displaces their own guilt or shame onto someone else to avoid accountability. This question shifts the focus away from their behavior and onto your emotions, planting a subtle sense of guilt within you. Rather than addressing the actual issue, the conversation quickly turns into a battle of integrity. You feel compelled to prove you're not being mean or unfair, while they never have to explain what they did. The goal is simple yet effective: to silence you. In professional settings, this script often repeats itself. You point out an error in a plan, suggest a correction, and immediately hear, "Are you accusing me of something?" Instead of discussing solutions, you're cornered into self-defense. Productivity drops, quality is ignored, and accountability quietly evaporates. In families or intimate relationships, the consequences run deeper. When you express hurt over someone's behavior, and they respond with that question, it makes you shrink back, doubt yourself, and fall silent. What began as a legitimate need for clarity becomes a mechanism to conceal wrongdoing. Psychologically, this tactic exploits a natural defense response. When someone implies we're guilty, we instinctively retreat or apologize. Manipulators know this and use it to their advantage. They don't need to justify or change, they only need to make you lose your ground. Repeated often enough, this erodes your confidence to speak up. You choose silence for the sake of peace, and ambiguity becomes the norm. How to respond? Maintain boundaries and redirect the focus back to behavior, not emotion. When you hear, "Are you accusing me of something?" reply calmly and firmly, "I'm not accusing you. I'm pointing out something that needs to be clarified." This short statement breaks the emotional trap and brings the conversation back to what truly matters: the behavior in question. You can also turn their question into a call for transparency. "I'm not accusing. I just want to understand what happened." This response requires them to provide information rather than continue the guilt play. In a professional context, ask for data, evidence, or a corrective plan. In personal relationships, ask for a clear and honest explanation. Composure is key. Emotional reactivity only fuels the game. A calm tone, concise words, and firm boundaries strip the projection of its power. Manipulators thrive on your confusion. When you don't provide it, they lose leverage. Jung reminds us, what we deny inwardly will eventually rule us from without. Projection is the psyche's way of disowning responsibility. When you recognize it and refuse to engage, you reclaim your right to ask questions, to seek clarity, and to have your emotions respected. This isn't hostility, it's psychological self-protection. A centered response also preserves goodwill. I'm not accusing you. I just felt hurt and want to understand better. This statement acknowledges your feeling while keeping the focus on their behavior. If avoidance continues, pause the exchange until both parties regain calm, or escalate the issue appropriately in a workplace setting. When necessary, stand firm in requesting proof or commitment to change in numbers, timelines, or concrete actions. Ultimately, transparency is the antidote to manipulation. Asking for clarity doesn't mean you're attacking. It means you're calling for accountability. In essence, "Are you accusing me of something?" is often an attempt to reverse responsibility. To avoid getting drawn in, hold your boundaries, reorient toward behavior, and demand clarity. When you do this, you protect your emotional integrity, while ensuring that your relationships, professional or personal, are grounded in maturity, honesty, and transparency. Question 4. Have I ever lied to you? At first glance, it sounds like a statement of innocence, a way to prove honesty. But in truth, it's a subtle emotional manipulation, designed to make you feel guilty for daring to doubt. When someone asks, "Have I ever lied to you?" they're not seeking an answer, they're forcing you to question yourself, to surrender your right to doubt, and to accept everything they say as unquestionable truth. The manipulator knows that trust is the foundation of every relationship, and so they weaponize it. They know you're kind, that you don't want to seem paranoid or suspicious. They use that very decency against you to silence you, to make you feel wrong for simply asking. This question is like a distorted mirror. It reflects your doubt back as a flaw, convincing you that you are the one breaking the trust, not them. In the workplace, a colleague might use it when you ask for clarification on a report. Instead of offering evidence, they snap back, "Have I ever lied to you?" leaving you uneasy, wondering if you've gone too far. In love, your partner might say the same when you question something unclear. They don't explain, they simply emphasize trust. And you, afraid of hurting them, begin to doubt your own intuition. Carl Jung once said, "What we deny in others is what we fear in ourselves." Manipulators understand this deeply. They exploit your fear of being seen as untrusting. Slowly, you begin to self-censor, to silence your intuition, even when your gut tells you something's off. Over time, you lose touch with your inner signals and become dependent on their words for clarity. This question operates as a psychological trap. It corners you between two false choices. Either you trust them completely, or you're the insecure, distrustful one. But that's an illusion. In a healthy relationship, trust is never demanded. It is cultivated through transparency and consistent action. If someone is truly honest, they don't need to ask, "Have I ever lied to you?" They simply show it through openness and integrity. The power of this question lies in its role reversal. The person who should explain becomes the one being interrogated, and the person with the right to ask becomes the one at fault. Once you're caught in that loop, guilt begins to replace clarity. You start apologizing for doubting, vowing not to be paranoid again, and in that moment, you surrender your right to the truth. To break this cycle, the key is calm self-possession. You don't have to answer the question on their terms. Instead, reclaim your agency with a response that restores balance. That's not the right question. The real question is, would I recognize it if you did lie? This answer reminds both of you that trust isn't built on declarations, but on awareness and healthy boundaries. It brings you back to the observer's seat, where emotion no longer clouds perception. In a professional setting, you might say, "I'm not saying you lied. I just want to clarify the information to ensure accuracy." This keeps the tone professional while maintaining your boundaries. In love or family, if someone says, "Have I ever lied to you?" you can respond gently, "I don't think you have. But I need to understand this better so we can deal with it honestly together." It's a way to remain respectful without surrendering your right to clarity, something every healthy relationship needs. At its core, "Have I ever lied to you?" tests the boundary between emotion and reason. If you react emotionally, you fall into guilt. But if you pause, breathe, and observe, you'll see the truth. The question isn't meant to find the truth, but to hide it. When you stand firm in awareness, its power dissolves. Remember, genuine trust never requires proof. Through words, it reveals itself through consistent, transparent action. If someone makes you feel guilty simply for seeking clarity, that's not love or respect, it's control. Trust your intuition. Trust what you feel. You have the right to ask, the right to understand, and the right to live in truth. And when someone asks again, "Have I ever lied to you?" smile and remember, that question speaks far more about them than it ever will about you. Question 5. Can't we just let this go? At first glance, this might sound like a plea for peace. But beneath that seemingly harmless question lies a subtle form of psychological manipulation. When someone says, "Can't we just let this go?" they're rarely seeking reconciliation, they're avoiding the truth, silencing dialogue, and maintaining a false sense of harmony. Manipulators understand that facing the truth often creates tension. They know you value harmony, that you dislike conflict, and they use that against you. This question makes you feel as if you're overreacting, as if wanting to clarify things is a sign of rigidity or pettiness. But in reality, the moment you let it go, you give up your power and allow them to stay in control. Behind the soft tone hides an unspoken message. If you keep bringing this up, you're the one ruining the peace. And so, to preserve the illusion of calm, you go silent. You swallow your unease, your unanswered doubts, and convince yourself, it's fine, let's just move on. But as Jung once said, what you resist persists. When truth is buried, it doesn't disappear, it simply waits, accumulating strength, until one day it explodes. In the workplace, this phrase often appears when there's an error or disagreement. A coworker might say, "It's a small issue, can't we just let it go?" Not because they want peace, but because they want to avoid accountability. If you agree, you've unintentionally reinforced a lack of transparency. Over time, unacknowledged mistakes become habitual, and trust in the workplace erodes. In families or romantic relationships, the question is even more dangerous. When you point out something that feels wrong, your partner or relative might respond, "Can't we just let it go?" implying that you're being too harsh. But love doesn't mean turning a blind eye to the truth. A healthy relationship thrives on honesty and clarity, not silence and avoidance. What they call letting go isn't forgiveness, it's evasion, and that avoidance slowly corrodes trust. This question often triggers guilt. It makes you wonder, am I the one making things worse? Gradually, you start believing you're the problem. You become more compliant, more tolerant, and lose your right to express your feelings. At that point, you're no longer a participant in the relationship, you're a silent sufferer. The consequence of letting things go is that truth never gets addressed. Small cracks deepen into fractures, and one day, everything falls apart. On the surface, everything looks calm, but underneath lies cold distance. The relationship becomes hollow, stripped of real trust and respect. To respond to this kind of question, the key is to stay grounded. Don't let your emotions be manipulated. When someone asks, "Can't we just let this go?" you can calmly but firmly reply, "I'm ready to move forward once we've understood this clearly." This response shows that you're not seeking conflict, but you're also not willing to ignore the truth. You're choosing clarity over pretense. In a professional context, if someone says, "It's no big deal, let's forget it," you can gently respond, "I just want to clarify it so we can avoid the same mistake next time." This keeps the tone respectful while maintaining boundaries. It's about improvement, not blame. In family or love, when someone tries to deflect, you can say, "I'm not trying to make this a big issue, but if we don't talk about it, it'll keep happening." That brings the focus back to the truth rather than emotional avoidance. Jung emphasized, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Facing the truth isn't about creating conflict, it's an act of courage and healing. Only by acknowledging the shadow can we transcend it. Remember, true peace doesn't come from avoidance, but from understanding. Letting go doesn't make things better. It merely soothes the surface while pain festers beneath. So the next time someone asks, "Can't we just let this go?" Smile and say, "I want to, but only after we truly understand what happened." That's how you stay kind while protecting the truth. Because real love doesn't fear confrontation, and genuine peace can only exist where truth is honored. Conclusion. In this article, we've explored 5 common psychologically manipulative questions that people may encounter in everyday life. From, "Why are you so sensitive?" to, "Can't we just let this go?" Each question goes far beyond simple curiosity. It's a subtle tactic designed to distort your perception, make you doubt your feelings, and question your own judgment. These questions are crafted to instill guilt, discourage you from seeking honesty and clarity, and even make you overlook truths you have every right to know. Recognizing and protecting yourself from these manipulative questions is essential. They don't just undermine your confidence or your sense of safety in relationships. They can also strip away your freedom to choose, speak, and act authentically. Each manipulative question is an opportunity to practice standing firm in your truth, to trust your emotions, and to protect what you rightfully deserve in every relationship. We can't always change the people around us, but we can change how we respond to them. Trust your intuition and your inner sense of truth. Your feelings are valid, and you have every right to ask for honesty, respect, and clarity in all your relationships. Don't let anyone manipulate you with words disguised as concern or reason. When you know yourself and stay grounded in your emotions, no one can control you. Finally, share this message to help others recognize and respond to manipulative questions in their own lives. By helping others awaken to these tactics, you also strengthen your own awareness and resilience. Never let anyone make you doubt yourself or feel guilty for seeking the truth. True strength begins when you choose to stand with your inner clarity, calmly, confidently, and unapologetically. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the Uncovering the Psyche channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss upcoming videos. See you in the next ones.